Look at this pesto. It's so green, so good, and no blender required, no mess to clean up. It's just the best. I love it.
I kind of hate to admit this, but the idea for this recipe actually came from a robot. Yeah, so when I was looking at my keyword research tool, and it just said it spat out spinach pesto, and I was like, why haven't I thought of that? Like, why haven't I ever made a spinach pesto? And my brain instantly went to, of course, one of my favorite ingredients of all time. And the result, of course, is this beautiful, easy, like the world's easiest spinach pesto recipe. To introduce myself, so I'm Jules Clancy. I'm a former food scientist. Now I'm a cooking coach, and I live in Australia. Have a thing for hats, and I'm really all about keeping cooking as simple as possible. So all my recipes and meals are based on 3+ ingredients. Let's jump into the kitchen. I'll show you how to make it first.
For our easy spinach pesto, which really is the easiest pesto in the world, I've just got a pack of frozen spinach, just soaked in boiling water to defrost. So I'm going to drain that. Okay, and then I've squeezed out most of the water because we don't want watery pesto. We want it nice and intense and flavoursome. What we do is just add in about half a cup, or less if you don't like it too parmesan-y, of grated parmesan cheese. And then I've got my magic garlic press here. So that was a big clove of garlic. I like lots of garlic in my pesto. You may like to use a smaller clove. You can always skip the garlic if you're not a garlic fan. And then half a cup of olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, but you could use less if you want it more like a thicker pesto. And then we're just going to mix that in. I'll get in a big pinch of salt as well. So we have amazing spinach pesto. And if you want to make it a bit more like classic pesto, you can add in some chopped pine nuts. Or actually what I often do if I want the nuts in there is I use cashews because they're heaps cheaper than pine nuts. If you want to add a bit more zestiness to it, you can always add a squeeze of lemon. And it just goes anywhere where you'd normally use pesto. For the pesto, just pop it in a glass jar and it keeps in the fridge for weeks. And you can also freeze it too, so super versatile.
Okay, so if you've enjoyed this easy spinach pesto that doesn't require a blender, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And I promised you the story. So yeah, like first time I made it, I was just like, why haven't I thought of this? Like it was so good. And I love that you can just stir it together. Like there's no need to like get the blender out, get the food processor out. Like it's just so easy. Like seriously, this is becoming my go-to pesto. Like yes, I love basil, but if I really want that kind of green sauce vibe, um, I'm more often these days I'm more likely to grab some frozen spinach than I am to buy a bunch of basil. Plus, that's frozen spinach is so cheap too. Yeah, and so one of the other things with my recipes is that I always include variations. So if you've got different dietary requirements that you need to take into consideration, then I include them with the recipe. So let's dive into those. If you do have fresh herbs around and you want to use those, please by all means, just chop them up finely and add them in, or you can add them and use your stick blender to puree if you like. So basil, of course, is the traditional for pesto, but I find parsley works really well. Or if you take in a different direction, mint or coriander, cilantro can work really well. Uh, in terms of nuts, you really don't need the nuts like they do, but they do add some crunch and make it a little bit more like they do add a little bit of complexity. So pine nuts, of course, are the classic, but my favorite nuts for this, if I am adding nuts to it, often I don't, is roast cashews, just because they add a similar flavor to pine nuts, but fraction of the price. But of course, you can play around almonds, walnuts, macadamias, like anything or a mixture of nuts can work really well. If you need to be dairy free or plant based, what I do for that is I just use nuts or extra nuts rather than and finally chop the nuts rather than using the parmesan. And my other tip for you, if you're making it dairy free, is I just add a little bit of miso paste, just enough to give you that kind of umami flavor that you get from the parmesan, but not enough to make it like taste, overly salty. And the other thing is if you make it like that and actually, even if you make the original recipe and you're wanting it a little bit fresher and more, if it's tasting a little bit flat, then just a squeeze of lemon can really, like just a tiny bit, will just take it up that notch. Of course, if you need to be nut free, then just skip the nuts or replace with extra parmesan. Different oils, extra virgin olive oil, of course, is classic, which is what I've used here, but any oil that you would normally use, avocado oil, macadamia oil, or a regular light flavored olive oil are all good choices. And if you happen to be not low FODMAP, which my Irishman, he's had problems, gut problems, and we've had to do that occasionally. And so the great option there is you can actually make a garlic oil. So soak the garlic in oil for half an hour or longer, and then discard the garlic solids, but use the flavored oil in the pesto. In terms of problem solving, thing to watch out for, of course, is just making sure that your spinach, that you squeeze it really dry, because otherwise it's going to make the pesto a little bit watery. But if it does happen to be watery, just adding some more parmesan or adding some nuts to it or some almond meal will thicken it up and solve that problem. And can you make this ahead of time? Absolutely. Like, it'll keep in the fridge for like 1 to 2 weeks in an airtight container, and you can freeze it as well. So that's good. Of course, like all pesto, it is nicer though on the day that you make it. So, but I certainly love the leftovers in the fridge. If you're tasting a bit flat, just a bit more salt or a squeeze of lemon is usually enough to like fix it and get it back in balance. So yeah, that's it for today. So I'd love to hear from you. Are you a pesto fan? Have you ever made a spinach pesto? Are you excited to try it? Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Or actually, and if you've got any ideas of like, actually I'm thinking now, but what other frozen vegetables could I use to make pesto? I'd love to hear from you. So have a beautiful week, day, month, whatever, and I will see you next time.